We are just beginning to learn the details of the process as it's obtained in China and learning what variables there are that could be used in Africa. How does this work in our part of the world?
I think both of you mentioned actually because African countries want to learn the Chinese model, and you both are the socialist leader and activists in your country. So I'm wondering, as Chinese, coming from China, a socialist country, I do see socialism, communism, China is demonized in the West in general. And it's basically like a red scare. If you mention communism, oh my God, that's so scary, right? So I'm wondering, is communism demonized in your countries as well?
It is, to the extent that our educational system and a lot of our cultural pillars like the church and so on are aligned to imperialism, to the real imperialism from the West. And therefore, there's a constant indoctrination through our schools, through our media and so on, that to the point that most people instinctively feel that communism somehow is some evil conspiracy. But I think you'll also find that for most people in Africa, the values that people hold dear are actually collective values. They're values of community. They're values of working together, of sharing, of solidarity. They just do not express it ideologically in the terms socialism or communism. But those terms are vilified to the point that people don't actually ask what they mean. People think they know what they mean, but they don't. So you find that there's across the continent, people admire China. People are curious. People want to know about how China did this. Because we remember, even if a lot of young Chinese people don't, what China was like 60 years ago, what China was like 100 years ago. Those were things that were pretty obvious in our time. I wasn't born then, obviously, but the history of the Chinese Revolution and the conditions in this part of the world were pretty well known to my generation. And the transformation that has taken place is maybe something that young Chinese people can take for granted now. The wealth, the power, the security. But we have seen the transition. And we've seen that transition take place in a period where we have stagnated or even fallen behind. China's been moving up. Okay. So when you say to people that China is a socialist or communist country, it makes them sit up. Maybe this communism thing is not so bad. It helps create a conversation. One of the big propaganda things, well, I think you mentioned it about the West, is to suggest that China's advance is not communism, it's not socialism. That there was a period in which China conceded to capitalism, and that the big threat is that China is moving back. But, Fred will say it much more eloquently than me. But the process of constructing communism is a struggle. You don't have the revolution that overnight everything is fixed. It's a process of planned struggle over many years to build a new society. And we see the faces. We understand the broad phases that China has gone through and the compromises you need to make at any given point in the struggle. 2 steps forward, 1 step backward, flanking, outflanking, and so on. We understand that at a broad level. We are just beginning to learn the details of the process as it's obtained in China and learning what variables there are that could be used in Africa. How does this work in our part of the world? So the language is perhaps vilified. There's a certain discomfort with the terms. But China's example is changing that, and we are working to make sure that it's understood. So we're very clear that we are communist, and we're very clear that China is going through the different phases of constructing this, and China is leaving lessons behind for all those of us who are working on a similar path. So, great props to China.
Yeah, in a truly peaceful world, development and even a democracy will have many different ways of expression. Countries will not all develop the same way. They are free to choose their own way of development. They are free to choose their own way of expressing democracy. If their path, the path they have traveled to be where they are, is the path through which all nations on this planet should travel, then there will be no nation that will develop. What was there for them is not there for us. As Comrade Opoku said, we don't have countries to exploit, to colonize, to plunder. We don't have. But they are used to demonizing everything that is not theirs. Everything that they don't like, including individuals. At the end of the day, what matters is the material conditions of people. The living conditions matter. How can you come and tell the Chinese people that their system is bad today? The system that has lifted them out of poverty over a historical shortest period possible. How can you tell them to hate themselves, to hate the effort, the products of their own efforts? For a long time, as Comrade Opoku said, they were trying to attribute the Chinese success to capitalism. But the Chinese leaders and the Chinese people are saying, we have developed because of socialism. That's what President Xi Jinping is telling the world, is telling us. That's what we are learning from them. And they are having problems with that. So they don't want the Chinese people to say they have developed because of socialism. They want the Chinese to say we are developing because of capitalism.
Yeah, because otherwise their fiction or this narrative that democracy and capitalism is the best thing in the world will collapse. If they see China as a socialist country become number one economy one day, defeat them, then how can they persuade their citizens as they are the beacon for freedom and democracy for the world?
They have caused all the wars we know in the 20th century and 21st century. They are still causing wars everywhere. What do they have to show the world in terms of democracy, in terms of human rights, in terms of a model, a sustainable model of development?